want to thank everyone for being here today. This is the third episode of In Conversation, our series with Kimberli Flores, and I'm your host. This is the third of our roundtable discussions in which we bring together various organization leaders, authors, historians, and artists to share their personal perspectives on the multiracial and multicultural intersectionality of the Latino community and how this impacts identity and inclusion today. I am happy to have each one of you here with us. Thank you for all of the support. I invite you all to share the replay when it's up within 24 hours on our social media platforms. And thank you for your continued support and ask you to remain in contact with us. Drop your email in the chat throughout the course of the event, and we'll take all the emails and put you on our email list and keep you informed of all the things that are happening for our panel series and our upcoming panel series. So these panels are in partnership with the International Society of Black Latinos, ISBL, in which I am a board member now, very happily. And I would like to introduce the Vice President of ISBL, Melissa Shepard, to tell us a little bit about our organization and how you can get involved. Hi, Melissa, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Kimberli. It's such a pleasure to be here today, welcoming all of you who have joined us to listen in on this wonderful series. And thank you, Kimberli, for all that you are doing to promote reflection and conversation about our diaspora, which is the mission of the International Society of Black Latinos. I want to say some things about Kimberli that are very important for all of you to know. Kimberli, she's an artist, and we're so thankful to have an artist in our midst. She's one of our newest board members, as well as a professional actress and dancer, working on various TV shows and films such as In the Heights, Marvel's Daredevil, Blue Bloods, Chicago PD, and in next week's episode of Bull on NBC, don't miss this. Kimberli has also graced the stages as a professional salsa dancer with various salsa legends, such as Celia Cruz, Tito Puente, and Mark Anthony. Kimberli is currently developing her latest passion project, a new television series entitled Transplant, chronicling the life and experiences of an Afro-Latinx woman trying to make it in Hollywood. Kimberli, we are so happy to have you as part of our board and to be in partnership for this series. And I look forward to an amazing and insightful conversation.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that. I'm very thrilled to be in partnership with ISBL, and you guys can go to visit ISBL and our website at www.blacklatinos.com to get all information about things that we've done, who we are, and what we're doing in the future. So our topic for today is Embrace or Erase, recognizing Blackness within the Latinx community. Now, the world we are currently in is slowly becoming aware that Latinos are not a monolith and embracing the idea that we don't have to all look one way to be considered Latino. We come in all colors and are from many different countries, and in some cases have very different cultural dynamics and even traditions. But the thing that we may not discuss so openly, but is for sure, is that African heritage and Blackness runs all throughout Latin America, and even in countries where you may never expect it. Now, given the knowledge of our histories and sometimes the obviousness of our features and bodies, why do we feel that Latinos appear to have a difficult time recognizing and sometimes embracing Blackness even today, in a world post Black Lives Matter movement even? Well, we're going to talk about all of this and more with our highly esteemed panelists this evening. And today, chatting with us, we have writer, poet, activist Yvette Modestine, and cultural anthropologist and documentary filmmaker, Dr. Sheila Walker. Let me tell you a little bit about Yvette. Yvette Modestine was raised in Colón, Panama. Ms. Modestine was named one of 30 Afro-Latinas you should know in the world. She was recently named as one of the 100 most influential African diaspora leaders. Ms. Modestine has been profiled by the Boston Globe as the uniter for her work in bringing the Latin American and African American community together, and for her activism in building a voice for the Afro-Latino community. She is founder and executive director of Encuentro Diaspora, Afro in Boston, Massachusetts. Ms. Modestine is the diaspora coordinator of the Red de Mujeres Afro-Latinoamericanas, Afro-Caribeñas y de la Diáspora, an international network of Afro-descendant women. Very interesting. She was recently named as one of the top 5 Latina activists by Wear Your Voice Media. Ms. Modestine is also the narrator of the film Cimarronaje in Panama, Maroons in Panama, a film by Toshi Sakai. And I'm going to be asking her more about that as well. She is a member of the IBW Board Institute of the Black World and a commissioner of the National African American Reparations Commission. She is a co-founder of ARAAC EEUU, a regional council of people of African descent from Latin America and the Caribbean. There's more, but I'll stop there. She's amazing. And I'll ask Yvette Modestine to jump on with us, please. Hello, hello.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome. And I will now bring on our second panelist. Without further ado, we have Dr. Sheila Walker, a cultural anthropologist and documentary filmmaker who has done fieldwork, lectured, and participated in cultural events in most of Africa and the global African diaspora, and has numerous scholarly and popular publications. Executive director of the nonprofit Afro Diaspora, Inc. Her goal is to share her experiences and knowledge of the global African diaspora. Her book, African Roots, American Cultures, Africa in the Creation of the Americas, and companion documentary, which I just saw yesterday, which is awesome, Scattered Africa, Faces, Voices of the African Diaspora. They're based on her international conference, The African Diaspora in the Modern World. Her book, Conocimiento desde adentro, los afro-suramericanos hablan de sus pueblos y sus historias. Knowledge from the inside, Afro-South Americans speak of their people and their histories. And we are also going to talk a bit about her documentary, Familiar Faces, Unexpected Places, a global African diaspora. Dr. Walker was professor of anthropology and director of the Center of African and African American Studies in the University of Texas at Austin, and professor of anthropology and director of the African Diaspora and the World Program at Spelman College. Dr. Sheila Walker, please join us. Wonderful. I'll add you up here with us. Thank you. This panel is a dream come true for me. Many of the board members know I've been sharing videos of lectures of the both of you. We've been chit-chatting. Your name has been buzzing around for the last few months since this panel started. So it's really exciting to have both of you here together, especially since you both know each other well and have worked together in some capacity. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that too. So shall we jump in? All right, so both of you women are pioneers and leaders in the areas of Afro-diaspora studies, I like to call it. And I would like to begin with each of you, if you wouldn't mind sharing your journey with your identity and telling us how you've come to label yourself and where you position Blackness in your life. And if you don't mind, I'll ask Yvette Modestine to open us up and to start the conversation.
Greetings and evening, everyone. And in keeping, saludos, Kimberli, wonderful to be here. In keeping with my elder African tradition, I will give the first words to my mentor, La Reina Diasporica, to Sheila Walker. I would be not following tradition if I spoke before her. So Sheila, I'll let you go first.
Well, thank you. I was really looking forward to hearing your version of your story, but in keeping with our African and African diasporic traditions, I have to start.
Yes.
So, and I will start in Africa because I went to Africa when I was 19, and you can imagine that was a few years ago. And I had to go to Africa because I went to Bryn Mawr College, a fashionable Eastern women's school, where I was the colored girl in my class, the last only colored girl in a Bryn Mawr class. Well, it wasn't bad. You know, it was an interesting cross-cultural experience, but I needed some balance. And so I found an exchange program and I went to Cameroon. I spent a summer, 2 months in Cameroon, living with a wonderful family that was just logically Pan-Africanist. It wasn't a big theory. It just made sense to them. And it was there that I learned about the African diaspora. They didn't use that word. It wasn't yet in common parlance. But the first thing they said was, welcome home. And I thought, welcome home? I wasn't in Africa looking for ancestors. This was way before Roots. It was before, Ancestry.com and all those things. I was looking for adventures, but they chose me. I was with a little group with the Experiment in International Living. Obviously, I was the chip in the cookie. And this family chose me exactly for that reason, because I was an African American. And they said, welcome home, welcome to the source. And I thought, welcome home? Hey, but I'm from Jersey. They knew more than I did. And so they asked me they asked me unusual questions. Do you know Sparrow from Trinidad? And I thought, well, maybe. But what does that have to do with me? I'm from the United States. He's a foreigner. Do you know Pelé from Brazil? I didn't. I didn't know anything about soccer at that point. I didn't know anything about Brazil, nor did I know why I should know about Brazil and why I should know about the Caribbean. And then I learned a little more about who I was and how learning about other people in the African diaspora in the Americas was a way of learning about me and the elements of my culture. I'm from Jersey, the northeast of the United States. I learned about the Africanity of my urban culture in the northeast of the United States, in Cameroon, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Cuba, in Panama, various places in the African diaspora. So that my identity now is that I am from the global African diaspora with a US passport as a result of a slave ship. And I think that all of us in the diaspora in the Americas can say that. And we're not the only African diasporans. I used to think it was really wonderful to know that we African diasporans exist between Chile and Canada. I didn't know yet about the Mascarene Islands, Seychelles, Mauritius, Reunion. I didn't know about Turkey. I didn't know about India. And there's more. There are all those African descended populations in the Pacific Ocean. And I'm so glad I don't know about them yet, because it gives me something to look forward to completing getting to know us around the world. And I think that's a good beginning. And so, Yvette, your story.
En Portobelo, Panamá, yo vi la cara más bella y pura, y por eso mi corazón se alegra de su negrura. Esa sí que es linda. Evening, everyone. Giving thanks to those whose shoulders I stand on. I start with that song because I was listening to that today, and I was born into Blackness. I was born into Africanness. As I was hearing Kimberli's introduction, I'm not multiracial, I'm Black. I'm African. Ain't no mix up, ain't no addition needed to that, ain't no extra to that. I come from a land that was a point of entry of Maroons, of Cimarrones, to the Americas, where we were 5 to 1, as Sheila taught me, and I learned as we worked on the film, Simanoraje en Panama, because she is part of Simanoraje en Panama. She's on the screen. She was 10 years straight working together, getting bitten by mosquitoes and standing under the rain and in the jungles of Panama and in Portobelo and all over, bringing for the history of the Congos, the Africans, that came to Panama. So I'm a product of this land. And then the second layer is that I'm also a product of the Silvermen, the Caribbean workers who built the Panama Canal. I am the granddaughter of a Jamaican man and a Martinican man. So I was raised with this Latin America, Afro-Antiano, African presence of the Congos to the, celebrating Bastille Day, because my uncle was the president of the French Société for 29 years. My father was the vice president. And then I am a product of Jim Crow and segregation in Panama, because those construction workers were part of the American territory called the Panama Canal Zone, where the US implemented Jim Crow segregated laws equal to here with American territory laws, but yet we were treated as less than. I was born in the same hospital as John McCain. I walked out Panamanian, he walked out American. Yet we had our own police department, our own nursing, our own schools. For the first 8 years of my life, all I saw was Black nurses, Black police officers, Black firefighters, Black doctors, Black accountants, Black mathematicians, which grounded me even more in, I can do anything I want to do. Some of the best tennis players come out of my community in Colon. And everything about Colon is the Africa in Panama. We don't get twisted up of si eres negro o no. If you are born and raised in Panama and in Colon especially, you're Black. You walk with your head up high. I come from a grandmother who is one of 2 women who owned her first bus company. So I come from a family history that was full of love and pride and joy and grace and love and sassiness. And then I had to come to the US and get that all disrupted, because I walked before people that said, yo no soy negro, yo soy puertorriqueño, yo no soy negro, yo soy dominicano. And I did not understand that. Did not understand that. So when I hear folks talk now about this new wave, ain't no wave for me. I woke up Black, I walk Black, I speak Spanish, which is a colonized language that we all speak, but that I am Black in Panama, I'm Black in Argentina, I am Black in Chile, I am Black in Santo Domingo. So I didn't have this thing that is happening that all of a sudden, when I came here, I had to say I'm an Afro-Latina, because I literally stood before Black people of all shades, sometimes even darker than me, saying, yo no soy negro. So then I adapted this term for the probably 25 years first 25 years that I've been here, and now going into more than 25 years, I finally have realized that that term does not do anything for me, because the term Latino is seeped in whiteness and white supremacy and leaning into whiteness. So combining it with that African pride doesn't do me no good, because you are still looking for whiteness to show up. And when you see me, all you see is a Black, African, proud Panamanian woman, daddy's girl, like Miss Sheila Walker. We both are daddy's girls. So there's no messing with that. So that's how I start tonight.
Yes. Oh, wow. I have to say, just thank you for your directness, your openness. And I was going to say unapologeticness. And then I was like, why would you even feel the need to apologize? And I think it's so important to just say that when we were starting to create this panel together, I threw out an idea of a panel title and it was Latinos, Latinx, whatever. And you said to me, I'm not interested in being a part of anything that doesn't center Blackness. And I thought, oh, it's so right, but that's what I'm doing. That's what the community that I want to serve. And I thought, but I didn't put the Afro Latino, I didn't put Black Latino even. And I had to step back and say, I was trying to cast a wide net. And in my experience of previous panels, when I would add in about our Afro, we're going to talk about our Afro Latino history, the viewership went down a bit. And when I would speak about it to people, or the number of shares of the flyer was less and less as it became more focused. And I subconsciously thought, well, I just want more people to come in and to listen. And in our conversation, you shared a lot of things. And I thought to myself, okay, this has to be the topic. And that's how the topic came about. Why? What is it subconsciously, that makes us in the Latino community shy away from embracing Blackness? And I know that you will come from a more direct perspective, Yvette, and Sheila, you can speak to even throughout the world where this is coming up, and in the various countries, this happens everywhere. And what I really want people today to think about is, how do you decide and choose how to identify, and why? And where did it come from? Did it come from your mom and your dad? Did it come from society? And we are in a spectrum of being with the trends and being in different generations. I'm learning about myself things that my parents didn't know. And I'm starting to label things differently to try and embrace that, but still struggling. And that's where this whole series came about. So thank you for that openness and directness. I appreciate that. And I will let the conversation continue by saying, and maybe by posing that question, what are some of the reasons you feel Latinos may not want to identify with their Blackness, or may feel like why they even can't, or think that they can't? And either of you can jump in and speak from your own, personal perspectives and the points of view you come from.
Well, in the United States, it wasn't up to us to decide what we were. The United States has the one-drop rule, and it was law in southern states. What percentage of what was called Black blood would make you Black? In some places, Virginia was, up south as opposed to down south, right? So like 1/8, Mississippi, anything at all. And so that meant that one great-great-grandparent who was Black made you Black, irrespective of your phenotype. So we in the United States really didn't have to think about it a lot. I mean, there were people who were very light who passed out of Blackness. And as a result of passing out of Blackness, became white and no longer had any family, any social relationships, or any culture in reality. So we didn't have to make that decision, am I or am I not? And there's a great expression in Spanish about people who say, oh, I'm not really Black. Si no es el Congo, es de Carabali. If she or he is not from Congo, she's from Calabar. Calabar is Nigeria, and the word became Carabali in the Americas. I've been surprised at people, and I met people in Paraguay who said, well, we're dark, but we're not Black, and we don't know why we're dark. We're told it's the sun. And I saw a film about Afro-Mexicans in the United States who said, people tell me that I'm Black, and I say, no, I'm Mexican. Well, I'm dark, but I'm not Black. Well, it's really easy here in the United States, the one-drop rule resolves it all. But I felt really bad about these folks who don't know enough about their history to know why they look like they look. It's our African ancestors, clearly. And if we know anything about the creation of the Americas, and generally we don't, is a fundamental factor is that between 1500 and 1800, almost all the people in the Americas were of African origin. I love this statistic of 6.5 million people who crossed the Americas. Yvette has heard this before, but I always say this because
I love when you talk about it, though.
I love to talk about this. 6.5 million people crossed the Atlantic. 5.5 million came from Africa, 1 million came from Europe. So how can we see the Americas as a European creation when almost everybody in the Americas, post-genocide of the indigenous people, almost everybody was African and African diaspora. All the foundations of the Americas, I guess we know that Africans were enslaved by Europeans, and that's how most Africans got to the Americas. And we are mistaught that Africans were enslaved just to be an unskilled labor migration. That makes no sense. Plus, it's not true. Africans were enslaved. It was a specialized recruitment system. There are people from what the Europeans called Costa da Mina, the mining coast, gold mines, gold coast, right? These Africans were recruited because of knowledge of gold metallurgy. The rice coast, rice in the Americas is African. It was domesticated in Africa, not in Asia, as we have been mistaught. So we have been mistaught a lot, and it's up to us to, as Bob Marley said, quoting Marcus Garvey, emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Garvey added, others can free your body, but only ourselves can free our minds.
Mm.
And this is why I think you guys are getting the best of the best in the combination of us together, because my reina always starts from where she started, and then I could pick up, because in answering that question, we need to know that the term Latino is only used in the US in the way that it's used. Outside of the US, it is not used to identify a group in such a way. So when I came here, yes, we're from Latin America, but people identify themselves outside of here through their country or from the region. Versus here, there's this sort of development, this creation of the term Latino, of the term Hispanic, that all leans into Europeanness and indigenousness with no tone of the Africanness coming in. So why do people who I think are born and raised in the US more inclined to deny Blackness? Is because everything in this country is so Black and white, and Latinos are put in the position to choose. And what has happened is that if they come out a little lighter, they lean into that whiteness and be like, no, because, yo vengo de todo. And when I knew, I had moments where the ancestor whispered things to me that I had to pay attention to, or things that happened to me my first years here that I had to pay attention to. When one of those moments was my father had come to pick me up in one of my semesters, either freshman ending or beginning of ending of sophomore. And one of my classmates came and said, there's a man asking for you. And my immediate response was, oh, Daddy's here, and she immediately said to me, no, it can't be your dad. And I knew exactly why she was telling me that, because my dad is Sheila's complexion. So she immediately thought, oh no, that can't be your dad, without understanding that, yeah, we come in all shades and sizes, even from our families. When I do trainings, Encuentro Diaspora Afro does training on unmasking identity or cultural competency. And when I ask folks, walk across the room if you're of African descent, most folks in this country don't even know what that means, which removes the conversation around skin and goes to the conversation about roots. So then that becomes a whole nother conversation, because you may not identify yourself as Black because you think you're too light, but are you of African descent is another question too that you need to answer. And a lot of people have not even faced that conversation. When then I explain to folks, I will, one of my early years when we founded Encuentro, and I was doing a training for this group of mother-daughters. And I said, walk across the room if you're of African descent. The daughter walked and the mother stayed. And the daughter was hysterically crying, asking her mom to cross over. Wow. So my whole thing of when I do this training is to let people land where they want to land. And what I then do is I usually walk up, and then you go in the middle if you don't know. So there were folks in the middle, there were folks that no, there were folks that yes. So I walked over to the daughter to console her, and I was like, why are you crying so much? She said, I don't understand why my mom looks the way that she does and still walks around and says she's not Black.
Mm.
And when I come home and I have to talk to her about things that are happening to me as a Black girl, she says, tú estás hablando de esas cosas. So I walked over to Mom and I said, ¿cómo se siente que su hija le está diciendo esto? Like, how are you feeling listening to your daughter? She literally was like, ella siempre está hablando de esas cosas, you know, and I said, le voy a preguntar algo y quizás se va a poner incómoda. I'm going to ask you something and you're going to get uncomfortable. And I said, ¿de dónde usted piensa que usted consiguió su color de su piel? She says to me, yo soy India. Now, if you don't know Dominican history, you'd be like, what's she talking about? But keep in mind that in Santo Domingo, they don't get to check off Black. It's not even an option for them. Their Black checkoff is Indio. So Mom is standing in that, you know, that reality, that historical reality. And she said, pero mi abuela era negra como yo. And I said, so usted no se considera negra? She said, no, yo soy India. And she really, really thought that, and then she went on to say, yo no soy como ellos, como esa gente, which I have been privy to go into Latino spaces and waiting for people to talk about me, you know, and be like, y esa negra, y esa gente, and I'd be like, sí, y esta negra habla español, you know. So I knew exactly what she was saying when she said, yo no soy como esta gente, because African Americans are presented around the world in such a negative place, in such a negative way, even though we stand on the shoulders of African American warriors to be here in this country, to be able to go to a movie, to be able to go to school, to be able to get the jobs that we have. But we come here and we be like, yo no quiero ser como esa gente, and separate ourselves from them. So Latinos have been, the US has created a lie, as James Baldwin wrote, that is so deeply rooted in the denial of humanity, of the pride that La Reina and I stand on as Black African women. Everything about this country says you are not supposed to be unapologetic about your Blackness. And Latinos have had to figure that out, you know, and go through that. You know, Kimberli, I smiled when we talked the first time without making the connection, but I spoke against your movie. You know, I was very critical of In the Heights.
Oh, yeah.
Love the movie, right? And my first thing was, I love the movie. Every interview I did about it, I love the movie because to me, it was a movie of Afro-Latinos. Clearly seeing you. What it didn't do. And my sister called me and she said, you're gonna love it. You like your dancing and your movement, you're gonna love it, you're gonna love it. And I'm like, you think I'm really gonna love it? And she was like, yeah, you're gonna love it. And she paused and she said, okay, what's wrong? What happened? It was a really good movie. And I stayed quiet. And she was like, and she said, there was no Yvette in the movie. And that is my problem with the movie. For a Latino community in this country to ask Hollywood to do full representation of Latinos, and then you have an opportunity to do a full representation of Latino from a Black neighborhood. Washington Heights is a Black neighborhood, predominantly Black Latinos live in that neighborhood, closely entwined with African Americans, and all you show is safe. That's the depth of the colorism and the anti-Blackness that exists in the Latino community.
My problem with the terminology Latin is, if I understand that word, it's a dead European language. And Hispanic, I mean, what's that about? Isn't that just identifying with your colonizer?
Yeah.
You know, we in the Americas have been force-fed European colonial languages. The Americas, all of these independent republics, are really the boundaries of European colonies that divided us into who speaks which colonial language. I mean, English is very convenient, but I'm not proud to speak it. It just, I just got born here. I could have gotten born anyplace else. So that whole identifying with the colonizer, for me, it's very problematic. And when I look at the Americas, I actually see another map. I see an African map of the Americas. Where are all of these royal Congos, that every place in Brazil and Minas Gerais and Rio and Bahia and Sao Paulo, Panama, Yvette has on her Congo queen outfit. Well, where does that come from? The Kingdom of Congo. One problem is that Europe conquered Africa because it had the arms to do so. It then colonized Africa. And in addition to colonizing Africa, it colonized the story. It colonized the history. So until now, Africa has a very bad press. When I went to Africa, I was 19, the image of Africa in the United States. And if there was an image of Africa in the rest of the Americas, it was probably quite similar. It was Tarzan. Primitive Africans, and this one white man who talks to animals, swings through the trees, and is smarter than all those Africans in their own home. Well, so I go to Cameroon and I look around. I don't see Tarzan any place. I lived in the capital, Fumban, of the Bamoun Kingdom. The father of the king, when I was there, had created a writing system for his language. He wrote books in his language about his culture. He created schools to teach his books. He built a palace that has been restored by UNESCO. So this was not really very primitive. And what was amazing for me was that these Africans knew so much more about the world than I did. There I am at my fancy, very white school. What did I know about the world? Very little. These Africans from a small town in the interior knew so much more. It was very embarrassing. I tried to hide my ignorance. Like they said, well, did you bring us any records? Did I know they had record players? Did I know they had electricity? I didn't tell them, but I think they figured it out. And then to just embarrass me more, they said, well, we'll play some of your music for you. You want to hear Mahalia? What about Harry Belafonte? You like Ray Charles? Yeah, we can play him. And they had a party, and I thought, ooh, an African party, great, drums, costumes, feathers, animal skins. Wrong. These folks were so elegant. I was very embarrassed. I was not elegant at all. And then the music, this African music I expected. No, it was the era of records previous to the current technology. They had all these records from Cuba, and they said, wait, how come you know how to dance to our music? And I said, well, I don't know why you think this is your music. I think it's from the Caribbean someplace. I'm from Jersey. I knew that music because I'm from Jersey. We were in the aura of New York. But knowing how to dance to what they considered their music, and later I realized it was their music. That's where it came from. We all got it. We in the Americas, we got it from Africa. We did something to it, and then it went around the world. And it is still going around the world. But when they saw that I could dance to their music, and the folks I was with, remember, I'm the only chip in the cookie, right? And I'm the only one who knows how to dance. They said, she really is one of ours. And we don't know what those other people are doing.
I love that, because I come through to my work as an artist, as a dancer first, as a salsa dancer, as you mentioned, Yvette, that's how I worked on In the Heights. And I found when I would go to Puerto Rico or when I went to Cuba, my Spanish isn't great, but I would dance, and I trained Afro-Cuban with a woman, La Mora Danis Perez from Cutumba, who is from Santiago de Cuba. And I've trained since I was 14 years old in salsa. And so I found that was my gateway, my connection to my family, connection to another culture through dance. And they respected that I learned it well enough So I think that music, dancing, you also talk about food. These are all ways that we can, that we see that we are united and we are similar. I do want to pick up something because Yvette, when you said to me, I identify as Black and I'm not mixed. And I had conversations with friends of mine who look closer to me, who also say, I identify as Black. And several of friends in my circle, we were discussing this and saying, but how can you say that? Are you allowed to say that? Because when I've been in communities, in African-American communities, and even if I try and, hey, sis, or hey, I've oftentimes been hit with, no, you're not my sis. And understandably so, because my experience, especially me being I consider lighter skinned in certain Latin circles, I'm trigueña or I'm the morena. So, I never know where I fit, but I definitely have not had the same experiences as you, for example, Yvette. And so what do you say to those of us who are trying to embrace our Blackness, but are concerned about overstepping or ignoring the other aspects in our culture that may be prevalent, maybe the Taino cultures or in other, cultures, of course, different indigenous roots? What do you say to that?
I mean, and let me just expand too. I am mixed because if you see my aunt, she could pass that Martinican thing. I'm a Modestine Hayot. Hayot is one of the largest plantations in Martinique. So yeah, I know I got something in me. But and Sheila knows that story, that history. But I say I'm Black because that's been my experience. That's how I move in the world. That's how I'm seen in the world. And I had to understand two key questions when I started doing this work from an intellectual place. Even though I already knew the answers, but I had to ask it intellectually because I learned very early on coming to this country that, Black means poor. I was not given an opportunity to say I came from two educated parents and I was almost raised upper middle class. That doesn't exist for an immigrant to be able to say that. That's not accepted or given room for. That I traveled before I came to this country. I was traveling as a child. My parents made it a point to have me have an understanding of the world. Like all these things that I had to go through as a check mark. But the thing that makes the US complicated is the colorism that exists within the African-American community and then within the Latino community, which then does not allow all shades to say I'm Black, because Black in this country is identified just depending on who you're talking to and generational. It can be about culture and then it can be about race. Sheila and I met almost 20 years ago, in more than 20 years ago, because we're celebrating Durban 20 years, and we met pre-Durban, where we met in Argentina. And then, all the people of African descent from all Latin America, we met there to begin the conversation of what we were going to do when we got to Durban. And then we went to Chile, and then we made it to Durban. And it was in Durban that the Africans of Latin America and the Caribbean, with such leaders as Sheila and the Danny Glovers and those that stayed that were from the US, that the term Afro-descendant was planted as a way to get away from the colorism perspective of Blackness and to go to the root of Blackness, which was to say, I am of African descent. Yo soy afrodescendiente. I'm an African descendant. So if folks understand that, then they shouldn't challenge your lightness or your darkness in this country. What makes it difficult for me is, and when you and I had that conversation, it was so wonderful that you were open to it. But I have not had easy conversations with Latinos who are now coming into their Afro-Latino-ness and think that they're equal to me. No, you're not. You just figured that out You have been able to not choose it. I have not been able to not choose my Blackness. I get treated immediately as a Black woman when I walk into any space. And I have had the instances where I go into a Latino place and they refuse to speak back to me in Spanish. They refuse to acknowledge me. But then I go into other places where as soon as they hear my accent or that I speak Spanish, then they're like, oh, you're wonderful. So I become the safer Black because the non-African American Black becomes the safer Black. And I'm like, no, I live an African American experience. No one knows I'm Panamanian until I say I'm Panamanian, or until I speak Spanish, or until I wear something that says I'm from Panama. So the conversation is complex for those who have been brought into this American lack of acknowledgement and identity of truth. You know, I'm a reparations commissioner, and we are now in 2021 fighting to get the true story being taught in our schools. We're fighting, you know, people are against the 1619 project. You know, this country is not ready to repair the damage that it has done to so many of us, you, so many of the people listening here, that says that to be Black, to identify as Black is a bad thing and comes with a struggle. And let me say, as I say in most of my presentation, it has come with a struggle that I did not expect. It continues to be a struggle that I did not want, but it's the struggle and a fight that is being guided by the ancestors. And I refuse to not speak their truth. Refuse. And now, as I stand on the shoulders of my father, who has recently transitioned, I extra refuse, because that Black man loved me for my Blackness and taught me to not give up and stand down to anybody. So whoever comes in contact with me now, and they need to prepare, be like, yeah, I'm Black. What you want? Y te lo digo, y te lo digo en español también. Yo soy negra pura, negrura pura, y no hay nada malo en eso. A mí me llama la atención. Yeah. I feel hurt before I felt anger when I came here. And I will understand. I literally would feel anger when I would stand in front of, and Boston is predominantly Dominican and Puerto Rican. I would be like, ¿qué le pasa a esta gente? Tú eres negro, mira tu cabello, mira tu nariz, mira tu, you know, like I literally would be like absolutely furious. Right. And then when I went deeper into understanding the US, deeper into my research of the history of the US and the Blackness, and being guided by African diaspora queens like Sheila, but also sitting with African folks that sat with Malcolm X, that sat with Queen Mother, or sat with Amiri Baraka, sat with my mentor, poetic mentor, Askia Touré, that I was just like, oh, there's more to this. There's more to this. There's more to this. There's more to this. And I don't understand how we don't want to know that there's more to this. And the more to this is every part of this world was touched by an African hand. Every part of this world has African story within it, above it, swimming in it, touching it. There is no denying of it.
Sheila, I just wanted to say that, thank you for that, Yvette. I am thinking now, and I'm thinking about when you say, I think from a Pan-African lens, and from your perspective being, I don't want to label you, but an African-American woman, from that perspective, coming from that perspective, why do you think, or do you think it's important that we start to see ourselves in that lens, so that we almost like looking at each other like we're cousins? Is there a necessity to understand that we are one? Is there benefit in understanding that and bridging that gap? And so from your perspective, the flip side, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would say that we are cousins, first of all. And when I give talks, sometimes I ask okay, who here is of African origin? And there are dark Black people who do not raise their hand, and there are white people who do raise their hand. And so I then have to say, okay, I mean, given what we know about the origins of human beings in Africa, about human language in Africa, everything came from Africa, right? So then I have to ask those people who are not of African origin, oh, okay, so you're clearly not from Earth. What planet did you come from? Are you from Mars? Are you from Venus? Because if you're from Earth, your origins are in Africa, period, and there's no other explanation. Europeans and Euro-Americans tried to come up with other explanations. They even planted bones and things. Didn't work. And Africans, the human origins in Africa just get older and older, increasingly explicit. Now, the most recent discovery of which I'm aware is of the 6,000 languages spoken on the planet now, they all came from one African language way back in the beginning. So, so that's one reason to understand our African origins. A man who was the head of one of the Smithsonian museums, a white man, said, what we can ask now of anybody on the planet is when and under which circumstances did your ancestors leave Africa? But to bring it a little more to the present, Yvette talked about this wonderful word, afrodescendiente, afrodescendant. And at the preparatory conference for the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, when we all arrived, it was wonderful. For me, it was the most wonderful meeting because it was the first time since those ships that carried human beings as cargoes, ships specifically designed by Europeans and Euro-Americans to transport human beings as cargo, human beings, the most valuable commodity commercialized in the Atlantic Ocean. This was the first time that the descendants of those people who arrived alive after that horrible journey got together. So there were the Anglophones, the Francophones, the Lusophones, the Hispanophones, the Creolophones, all together for the first time. And initially, the discussions were all about how exceptional we are. Oh no, we're more exceptional than you. Everybody was being more exceptional than everybody else. And there were a couple of us who've been around a little bit who say, yeah, but if you listen, you'll notice that your exceptionalness is exactly the same as their exceptionalness. The Garifuna were talking about being threatened with language loss. The Colombians were talking about being threatened with language loss, land loss. African Americans from the Southern United States were talking about having lost land already. And so it's exactly the same story all over the place. And so Romero Rodriguez from Uruguay, who was the creator, dynamic force of Organización in Uruguay. He, leading a gathering in Chile, said, entramos como negros, salimos como afrodescendientes. And so we went in with our little narrow national identities intact. And we came out with a larger identity that became the term that was used in the documents that went to Durban, and Afro-descendants became a reality. So why wouldn't we want to have a big inclusive identity rather than some little, oh, I'm an oppressed minority in this country? You're talking about, Yvette talked about the Indios, right? Here in the United States, we were not always pleased to have African ancestors. I mean, one of the sentences that one might hear from us, US African Americans, is, I ain't left nothing, no Africa. And I think it's true. We brought it with us. It is in the pot when we cook, when we put that okra in the pot, you know, pepper. Yeah, there it is. So we have brought Africa with us. We don't know how to identify it, but if we start to identify it, then we see the commonalities. I mean, some people eat gandules and other people eat guandules, and some people eat poadongol. It's the same thing. In English, it's called, for reasons I don't know, pigeon peas. In Kikongo, it's called wandu, that gave us all that. And there's a poem by Nicolas Guillen, Afro-Cuban poet. I don't know most of the poem. I only like the refrain, in which he says, sin conocernos nos reconoceremos. We don't, if even without knowing each other, we will recognize each other by the way we dance, by what we eat, by how we be. So I think it's, if we know the story, then
Mhm.
my great grandmother, the Indian, right, with the long straight hair all the way down her back, could sit on it. What I learned about my great grandmother, the Indian, her name was Amelia Congo Kingdom. And so when I went to Ecuador, I was in the Chota Valley up in the foothills of the Andes, and I meet people named Congo. So what am I supposed to say? Hola primo, hola prima. Yes, it is an extended African family. I didn't recognize that.
And my experience of picking up where Sheila left is when I went to Chota, and I got off the bus, um, I couldn't stop crying because I literally felt like I have an ancestor that's from here. We came through here. And then to understand Panama's connection to Ecuador goes back to where I started with singing about El Nazareno, because the story behind El Nazareno, El Cristo Negro, was that it was built to be taken to Ecuador. But then when they were finished and they tried to get it to the ocean, it kept raining so bad that they couldn't get it out of Panama. And that's why it remains in Portobelo Colón. So, and when I traveled in, when I go to the UN conference on the status of women of girls every year, once a year they have it, and I'm very Afrocentric in my dressing, always been, not just, it's not a new thing, it's just who I am. It's funny that I have women from Nigeria claiming me, and the woman from Barbados is like, yes. And I mean, I've had women come up and like look at my cheekbone, like they automatically come and talk to me depending on what I have on. And they think I'm from, Sierra Leone or Ivory Coast or something. But then if I say no, they're waiting for me to say somewhere in the continent. And then I keep waiting and they keep calling out all these names. It's like, but your cheekbones and your forehead and your skin tone, look, you have like a little undertone. And they go through so much. And I'm like, yeah, I was born in Panama. And then like, so they go into massive shock, so, and then I'm a Ifa practitioner, I'm a Yoruba practitioner, and we have more practitioners in the diaspora than you do even on the continent. So I would meet people from Nigeria and I'll be like, Ekabo, and they'll be like, how you know that? I'm like, yes, I'm a Yoruba practitioner, I'm a Santera. But so then they go into shock, like, how do you know that? And we don't even know that, so sometimes we have even retained certain things more within the global African diaspora than within the continent itself. And Sheila is definitely someone that has taught us to look for beyond that. My father loved watching Sheila eat. Loved watching Sheila eat, because Sheila would come to Panama and we would be in the Etna Negra parade, and there would be all these foods, and Sheila would literally eat every single thing, as small as you see her here, as tiny as she is, eat everything. And not only could eat it, Daddy was fascinated by this. She would eat it. She would tell you, how it's connected to Panama, but where in other places that she has traveled, she ate that food and what they added to it and what they had in it or whatever. So she would eat it with this sort of African joy, that it wasn't just a Panamanian meal, that it was connected to something bigger than Panama. So, Kwame Nkrumah says, and I said this in one of my, in my PBS stories from the stage, is that I'm not African because I was born in Africa. I'm African because Africa was born in me. When you get to that place and you understand that, then you see it. Just like how Sheila, mentioned Bob Marley and Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey said, why am I going to give up a whole, continent and world for one little island? It's like, so when you understand that, or I'll share one more story of a mentor, Clara Richards, who Sheila also knows. It's the man behind, one of the main voices behind etnia negra in Panama, you know, Black history in Panama. And early on when I met him and we sat for hours and he said to me, yo quiero que la gente entienda, I want people to understand que cuando nos pusieron en ese barco, when they put us on that boat, nos pusieron en familias, pero cuando nos quitaron de ese barco, no nos quitaron en familias. El papá se quedó en Panamá, la mamá estaba en México, la hija está en Ecuador, el hijo está en Perú. So when you understand that when they dragged us off that ship, they didn't drag us off in family units. The father was dropped off one way, the sister was dropped off one way, the mother was dropped off one way. When you understand that, then every person of African descent, Black person that stands in front of you, before you do harm, you treat them as a family until they do otherwise, because you don't know that they could be.
Absolutely.
They could be. Someone on this call tonight could be related to someone if you understand that history.
Beautiful. I could talk to you ladies for hours and hours and hours, but I have to ask this, if we could just take another minute for this and before we wrap up. And it is kind of similar to a question that was asked by Wala El Sheikh. She says, I'll read her question and then I'll bring it around. Have you experienced someone going from not identifying as Black or Afro-Latinx to embracing their identity? What was their journey like? And what can we learn from that, from them, to support others making the connection to their African descent? And I was going to say, what would you say to the youth, to the younger generation, from all of your experience and knowledge, when it comes to stepping into centering Blackness for themselves? And then just to throw this in here, Layla Masaroni said, how do we resist colorism? So I'll throw that in there too and see, you know, what advice do you have for us?
You know, I run a identity leadership program in a high school for young men and women, and it's a two-way bilingual school, predominantly Latino kids. And, you know, we take them through the journey of wanting to understand their identity. What has been sad is that they then have to still go home with parents who have not had their journey and have refused that journey. So the younger generation is living very schizophrenic lives because at home they're not able to say I'm Black, but everything about what they're doing when they leave that home is identifying with their Black identity. What I have seen is that it has not been an easy journey. Even adults that come to our trainings, adult mentees of mine, adult friends of mine who are now coming into it, have come into it leaving their homes, leaving their families, going to universities, being in other spaces where for years they were walking around just amongst Latinos and everybody was denying it. And then, I mean, like there's an area here in Massachusetts that's called Lawrence, which I am convinced someone went from to Bani and yelled out, vengan a Lawrence, porque todo Lawrence son de Bani. So what happens is when you live amongst yourself, there's no other story going on other than this denial story. And mostly everyone that I have met that has grown up in Lawrence, once they leave Lawrence and they're not in this standard Latino looking space that everybody wants to pretend that they're not Black, they're realizing that they're not Black when they're in white settings. One of my young women went to college, and when she was in my program, would cry when you would tell her she was Black, llorando, because Dominicans sadly historically have been told that Black means Haitian. So there's a deep denial to embrace that. And Lisa would fight us and argue, and no, I'm not. That you would say, pero el bembe and you know, palos and all these parties and the la bachata and la, you know, el merengue. Where do you think? Nah. She went to college. She is your shade, Kimberly. She was your complexion. And, you know, her family had her thinking that that meant she was light and white. But then she goes to college and her roommate is white. And what happens? Her roommate is like, who are you to be walking around thinking you like me? So as soon as they have a conflict, what does the roommate do? You nigga. So what does Lisa do? Stomp her and gets expelled from school. And then calls me and goes, Miss Yvette, you were right. So when you go, you may pretend to be lighter and better in communities of color because that whiteness gets played out even within our communities of color, the colorism, the light to the dark. But then when you go to predominant white settings, they're not seeing you as black, white. They're seeing you as a, what the woman called Lisa. So I think everyone has their journey, but, and I think it's wonderful that people are coming into it, but I'm concerned that it's the people that are coming into it. And in this year of so, if you don't know who Sheila Walker is, and if you don't know who Yvette Modestine is, not to be conceited to either one of us, then you haven't done your work. So people are coming in and getting popular just by likes on Instagram and a good post on, on Twitter, and they get covered, but they have no historical understanding, no history of the work. If you haven't seen Scattered Africa, you haven't seen anything. If you haven't read Women Warriors of the Afro-Latina Diaspora, you haven't read a book if you're really interested in this journey. So those are some of the things that I would say.
Wonderful, thank you. And how about you?
Yeah, we need to understand that colorism is really about being colonized, okay? I mean, why do you want to identify with your oppressor? You have a choice. You can identify with your oppressor or you can not identify with your oppressor. And this is about all of us because we all have these same colorism concepts. I realized it when I was studying Portuguese, and there's a book, Jubiabá, Jorge Amado, and Jubiabá liked to make love with mulatas de bom cabelo with good hair. Had I seen that in English, I probably wouldn't have seen it. But since it was in another language, I thought, okay, the diaspora is all the same. We all have an expression, pelo malo, right? Pelo bueno, no? Shiva sauve, in Martinique and Creole, saved hair, saved. So I think if we understand what we're doing, we're identifying with the owner of human beings, as opposed to with the human beings who got owned because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Plus they had knowledge systems that the Europeans wanted with which to build the Americas. So once we understand that it was African knowledge systems that built the Americas, do we want to identify with people who thought it was perfectly fine? Now, these are good Christians, right? Perfectly fine to create boats specifically designed for treating human beings as things in order to enrich themselves, and then to name the boats St. John, Our Lady of whatever. I mean, to name these these floating dungeons for Catholic saints, there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that mentality. And there are people who, a lot of people, talk about our history in terms of the trauma. I don't, because I figure somebody else is already doing that. And I'm more interested in the triumphs, what we brought to the Americas. So we brought not only the basic technologies that built the Americas, that enriched Europe, but we also brought, in spite of all the mistreatment, we brought all that creativity to create new language systems, new spiritual systems. And that's all about triumph. And if you think about the joy, the creativity of the Americas, who's that about? I mean, if you think about the carnivals all over the Americas, whose carnivals are they? They may have been whitened, but that's not where they came from. That's not where that behavior, that joyous behavior, that joie de vivre, that's not where that came from. That came from Africa. And in colonial Louisiana, I was reading this article, and initially I didn't get it. the article was about bambula. In French, it's an insult to use that term for Black folks. In colonial Louisiana, it was used by the French colonists. It was used by the Congo people who were dancing in Congo Square, and they were using that term bambula. And what they were saying was, we are dancing for our ancestors. We are talking about where we came from, who we are. According to the author of this article, Honoré Mobonda from Congo, they were colonizing cultural space in the Americas. And so if you look at all of the Americas, we're all dancing for the ancestors, colonizing African space. And how much richer are we for that? And so we've got to think about, what is our real perspective, as opposed to looking at oneself through somebody else's eyes. That makes no sense whatsoever.
Wow. Wow. I don't want to stop. I have so many more questions. I have so many things that you both just shared.
Can we come back?
Yes,
we should do a part two.
Yeah, we can show films.
I would love that. I have so many questions bubbling, and yes, Dr. Sheila Walker has some films that she's allowed me to take a look at, and they are amazing. And we need to do a screening and have you come back. And also, Yvette, for your projects, I would love to screen. I wanted to share a slice of your poetry, but we'll probably have to do that next time, because you have a beautiful piece on PBS that I saw that I wanted to share. But what I will say and echo is that my hope is that In Conversation is a step towards introducing my generation, all generations, to women like you both, and will help just in an hour and some change, pique interest, to then go and look for Yvette Modestine, go listen to her talks. Everything's virtual now. Listen to Dr. Sheila Walker, pick up her books, pick up all of this knowledge and surround yourself, because I can't agree enough. It's not just enough to put on a label. We have to really understand and sit in and understand, so we can pass on and we can shift the narratives for our children. And so when we're in spaces, we can broaden beyond just a label and explain, so that people can really say, oh, now I understand. Now I see you. Not I'm just changing my label to appease you, but now I see you. And if we don't see and understand ourselves, then there's no way we can have others see and understand us. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a dream come true. I need to thank Melissa Shepard, our vice president, because I told her I want to please have Yvette and Sheila together, and she reached out and she got both of you on here. So I'm so thankful. On behalf of myself and the board of ISBL and our organization, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for everyone, to everyone for being here. I saw some of your comments and I was able to read some of them. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all questions, but please leave your email so we can be in touch and contact you for the next series. And we will have you both on very soon. I wish you lots of luck in all your projects and endeavors, and we will be in touch for sure. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and please remain in conversation. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, Reina. Gusto en verla. And Kimberli, thank you for inviting us. This was wonderful. Thank you. It was a wonderful experience. You brought me and Sheila together, so that within itself was a joy.
Yes. What a gift and an honor. It's been an honor to spend time with both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Hasta la fiesta.